presentation by Joe Fong from Electronics and Engineering Group of. Hello, and welcome to Workplace 5.0, just when you thought we had it all figured out. What you're about to see is a live presentation by Peter Coman from PDS Consulting, New York. You can also contribute and upvote questions in the Q&A window tab. Enjoy the show.
G'day everyone, Pete Techman Coman here, coming to you live from New York. For those that don't know, I recently moved to New York, which was great timing on my behalf. So it's a very different New York that I'm experiencing over here at the moment. It's unfortunate that things aren't the way they normally are, but I'm sure it won't be long before we get back to some form of normal. Speaking of normal, we would normally be meeting face-to-face right now at Infocom in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, this year that we're not able to do that. So this is the next best thing. And I'm just grateful that Infocom have allowed me to present Workplace 5.0 just when you thought you had it all figured out. So let's get into it. So if we're talking about Workplace 5.0, we need to know what's Workplace 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and so on. So if we go back in history and we have a look at it, so Workplace 1.0 could be described as, you know, the invention of like the steam engine, the first industrial revolution, okay, where which happened around the late 18th century. Okay, we then evolved to Workplace 2.0, which saw the beginning of mass production, and that happened around, you know, the late 19th century. Workplace 3.0 is probably more a time that some of us would remember. So it started from about the 70s and went through to sort of the 90s, and we started to seeing things like computers being deployed throughout workplaces. We started to see mobile telephones being more commonly used. So it was basically the globalization and digitalization transformation of the economy during that period. And that brings us to Workplace 4.0. And Workplace 4.0 can be described as, you know, with a lot of use of technology and the integration of those technologies. We also see much more flexible workspaces, and this is the environment that we're used to, that we've evolved to, and that we've been designing for over the last 10 years. So, what's Workplace 5.0? So what I'm going to do is actually give you a different sort of perspective, right? So obviously everything was going along just great until this little virus turned up, the coronavirus, which really changed everything. It shut down economies. Everyone has been put into isolation around the world. So it's actually caused obviously a huge impact, not on just our daily lives, but the way that we work. So what I want to do is actually have a look into what the workplace is actually going to look like moving forward. Now, granted that in different locations around the world, you'll have different impacts, but what I'm presenting today is from my experience here in New York, the people that I'm talking to, and just what we think is actually going to happen, and how technology is actually going to play a role in supporting this new workplace. So let's start with the physical space. I came across this survey, and which is quite interesting, because you can see here that the majority of people rated air quality as the most important thing in their workplace, followed by light and water and temperature. But what's interesting about this is this was actually taken about 12 months ago, and I'm sure if the same survey was done this time like in the last couple of weeks, I think you would actually get very different results. I think you would find things like hygiene would be at the top of that list, right? Rather than air quality. Or, not saying that air quality is not important, but I think that we have different values, and it's just amazing how that has changed in a very, very short period of time. Like I said, obviously things like cleanliness is at the top of everyone's list. Hygiene, I think in the workplace, in the physical space, we're going to see obviously, and this is already happening, by the way. We're seeing the deployment of hand sanitizers throughout our workspaces, and also cleaning regimes have changed as well. So we're actually cleaning a lot more than what we used to try and try to give our people who come into the workplace, give them a lot more confidence that the workplace is clean, and they're not going to contract any diseases or viruses. And what's interesting with the different people that we've been talking to in the industry here, one of the things that has been at the top of people's lists by trying to encourage people to come back to the workplace is actually having cleaners visible, having them around. So even if they're not cleaning, the fact that the people are seeing the cleaners there is giving the people more confidence that it is a safe environment. This is actually a real deployment, a COVID-19 isolation room. 12 months ago, people couldn't have dreamt that you would have such a space in the workplace. This is becoming quite common around the different workplaces. We're seeing arrows trying to navigate people around, having sort of one-way traffic. So people are kept apart. So we're maintaining that physical distancing from each other. But we all know that that's nothing new. I mean, IKEA's been doing this for years. So I don't know if they had some prior knowledge of what's going on, but they've had this around for a while, as we all know. The good old cubicles. I don't think that we're going to go back to this kind of environment. There has been some talk that it could make a comeback to help with that physical distancing component. But yeah, I think that's resigned to the history books, the cubicles. But it'd be interesting to see what actually happens. You might find that some companies decide to roll that out as a way to help protect their staff. Instead, what we're seeing is, and once again, talking to the various architects over here, is that what they're suggesting is work with what you've got. So instead of going through and completely redesigning the workspace, what they're talking about is, well, if you've got a 10-person meeting room, then what they're recommending is removing half the chairs. So you can't have 10 people in that room. You've only got that 5 people, right? And also, if you have furniture that is configurable, like in this photo here, then what they're doing is they're separating those desks out. And if that's not possible, so in like this is kind of more of a hot desking environment. What we're hearing and what we're starting to see is the approach will be every second seat. And I think we'll actually see that we'll actually be moving away from hot desks in the short term, so people aren't sharing spaces. I think we'll go back to more of a dedicated kind of scenario in the workplace. What we're also hearing is, and not yet seeing, but more so hearing with the various people that we're talking to, is having an A team and a B team, or no one likes to be on the B team, so maybe a blue team and a green team. And what they will do is that it may be 1 week on, 1 week off. So they will rotate that. So they'll work from home or work remotely, and then they'll come in and they'll actually have their own seat. So the whole idea is not to be sharing with someone else. They'll have their own seat and maintain that physical distancing within the workplace. And I don't think also, a lot of people have been talking about, will the real estate will the office footprint shrink? I don't think so. I think it will stay as it is. I don't think it'll increase. I don't think it'll decrease. I think it'll stay as it is. And as I said, you'll just have 50% of the people in the same amount of space. But the one thing that I find really interesting being here in New York, which is the supposed epicenter of the coronavirus, is that a lot of the companies that we're talking to at the earliest, they're talking about coming back to work, opening their offices back up in October, which is a bit of a surprise. I would have thought, I mean, I've been coming into the office every day, but you know, I'm one of a few. Essentially, the city is still locked down. So, and we've been locked down, you know, probably 4 weeks before, certainly back in Australia, and you know, we're still under those conditions. So I think what's going to happen, a lot of these companies are actually talking about not just October, but even some of them are talking about next year. And I think part of the reason is that things have been going pretty well for them, with people working remotely, and that they think, well, let's just continue on with that. Hopefully by, you know, early next year, that people would have, you know, their confidence has come back, so they're not afraid to go back to work, and essentially they're going to wait it out. So a bit of a surprise, but that's the talk of what's happening over here. So we spoke about the physical space. So let's talk a bit more about the technology. I mean, that's why the majority of us are on this call today, is to talk about the tech and how we in the tech industry can play a role in deploying this for our clients. So the first bit of tech that I want to talk about is thermal cameras. And I think you find that, I mean, a lot of buildings these days actually have physical barriers to stop people from entering or unauthorized people from entering and going up to the floors. So I think what you'll start to see is the building owners need to protect the tenants within the space. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, once again, the US market is quite litigious. So imagine if a building owner let someone came in that had COVID and spread it to other tenants within the building. So I think they will start to deploy this kind of technology at the turnstiles, the electronic or the physical turnstiles that they have, and stop them from actually passing through, right? And turn them away and say, well, you can come back and you can try again maybe in half an hour, or come back tomorrow or whenever, but just not let them in the building at all. The other thing that I think we're going to see more of in the US in particular is facial recognition. Granted, facial recognition is deployed on a wider basis, or a more common basis in other parts of the world, but in the US, it's quite interesting because they're quite anti-cameras, but I think this will be the tipping point. I think that, you know, things like security and people's health and well-being are going to outweigh any privacy concerns. I mean, we saw that with 9/11 when that happened, and the increased security at airports around the world, and that hasn't gone back. Those security standards have maintained, and I think we'll start to see facial recognition rolled out on a more regular basis. Right? It'll be a lot more common than what it is in the US as we speak. One of the big things that people are worried about is touching things. So you see people, especially over here, wearing gloves everywhere. They're scared to touch things, right? So we need to start thinking about technologies that allow for a touchless or less touch environment. And so just like facial recognition could be used for access control and let you through turnstiles and through doors, and we can automate doors to open up so we're not touching anything. I mean, it's very hard to get through the day without touching something, but so we've got to try and reduce the number of touch points as much as we possibly can. How does that affect us in what we do? Well, things like one-touch meetings. I think whilst it has been around for a little while now, I think that you'll start to see more people wanting to have this kind of environment deployed within their workplace, or this kind of technology deployed in their workplace. Set meetings ready to go, one touch, bang, meeting started. Along the same lines, I think, once again, trying to do away with touching things. I mean, think about cables. In a lot of these meeting spaces, we have a lot of cables, HDMI cables, USB cables, all sorts of cables in there that people touch on a regular basis. Now, I've never seen anyone come in and clean a cable. They might clean the desk, the table. They don't clean the cables. So wireless presentation technology, I think, will also become more common. Obviously, it is deployed a lot already, but once again, I just think it will be more at the forefront of people's minds to use this kind of technology rather than plugging a cable in. And we're seeing some great new technologies come out from various vendors. You know, we've got wireless USB, so we're able to actually connect with cameras and microphones and speakers within the place and utilize the equipment within the room. NFC, it's another technology that's been around for a while. And once again, this goes along with the whole theme of trying to have less touch points, and we have a lot of technology in our pocket, and we could utilize our own personal devices as access control using technologies such as NFC. Things like visitor registration. I'm not a massive fan of QR codes, but I think it has its place for things like visitor registration. So if you were to turn up to a building and you get an email and it's got a QR code on it, once again, the most common form of visitor registration check-in kiosks are touch panels. Once again, you're touching a screen that other people have touched. So what about just scanning a QR code and it populates the visitor registration with your details and notifies the person who has invited you that you're actually there. So once again, trying to create a touchless environment where possible. Keeping with the theme of using your own personal devices, I think that there'll be more of a push to use your mobile device to control your space. So, you know, whether that's controlling your lamp or air conditioning or so on. So once again, you're not touching light switches and other devices that are regularly touched throughout the day. This is actually my desk. This is where I'm sitting right now. I have a lamp at my desk. I control that through a LIFX smart lamp, smart light bulb, and I control that from my phone. So it's very, very easy and simple to roll out. You've probably heard me talk a lot about voice. Once again, I think voice, it'll be the tipping point for voice to be rolled out into the workspace. You know, 60% of US households own a smart speaker. So, and I think the biggest concern has been in the past has been around security. You know, it's like it's always listening. And it's like, yeah, sure, it's always listening, but it's always listening at home as well. So what, you don't have private conversations at home. So once again, I think now with what's gone on, trying to create a touchless environment, voice will come into its own. I think it'll be the tipping point. We'll actually start to see this rolled out on a more regular basis. And the other thing is that, I mean, why aren't we utilizing devices like this in our industry? We're deploying a lot of expensive touch panels around the place, which is fine. That once again, they serve a purpose. But I think if someone can harness the power of a device such as, you know, Amazon Alexa, I mean, this is sitting on my desk. It's a 10-inch color touchscreen with a camera built into it, a microphone and a speaker, and it was $179 US. So how can we deploy this technology into the meeting spaces. So if people want to touch it, they can touch it. If they don't want to touch it, they can talk to it. Right? It's a very inexpensive way of getting this technology out and controlling the environment. So I know people see it as a consumer device, but I really think that you'll start to see companies harness the power of these kinds of devices in the workplace in the not too distant future. Android 11 is currently out in beta form, and what's interesting about that is that it's actually fully voice controlled. So you can talk to it and say, open Twitter, you type a message, close Twitter, scroll through your photos. You can talk to it and actually control the whole phone through voice. So it's not just typing a message, it's actually full control of that device. So once again, the technology is here to be able to do these kinds of things. So it won't be long before it's deployed in the workplace. Sensors like this, I think, are going to actually have probably the biggest impact for a number of reasons. They not only able to do people counting, they're not only able to sort of monitor the air, and obviously keep track of, make sure that people are physically distancing, but it allows you to keep track of the spaces and notify maybe the cleaning team that areas are more heavily used than others. So instead of, at the moment, no one really knows how their space is being used. So for example, if you're talking about a cleaning regime, the cleaner would come in and they would clean the whole space, right? Every day. Normally they would come in and do that time and time again. Well, what if they were able to be more efficient? What if they were able to only clean, what if they knew what spaces were being used and what spaces weren't being used? They could go in there and just clean those spaces, right? So they could actually maybe do a more thorough clean. They can clean, get through, the building in with a lot more efficiency. So sensors such as this allow tracking of spaces and what spaces are being used, and you can deploy it for purposes like this. They also can give you information such as you can actually set it up to know whether or not the occupancy rate has been exceeded, which is a lot of governments are actually saying, well, look, sure, you can come back to work, whether that's in the building environment or just the regular workplace, but it's 50% maximum capacity. Okay, how do you know that? How can you track that? So that's where these sensors come into play. Some other technology that's probably not quite here, but once again, it sort of goes along with obviously it's a wearable, augmented reality. It's a personal device, so you could actually, instead of sharing conference spaces, you can actually share content with each other from your own workstation. The other technology that I think it's not quite ready yet, but it's very, very close, is LiDAR. So with the other sensor that I spoke about before, it goes up on the ceiling. Essentially, it has a camera built into it, and it monitors the space. So it's got a low resolution camera, and it can only pick up a certain area. Where LiDAR can actually go through walls, you need less sensors to be deployed throughout the workplace, and you can actually track people's movement around. It has a wider field of view. There's many benefits. As I said, it's not quite. I haven't really seen anyone perfect it yet, but it's probably the next technology that will be deployed in the workplace for people tracking and make sure that social distancing is maintained. So we've spoken about the tech. What else do we need to consider here for Workplace 5.0? We've obviously had a bit of fun on Zoom calls. People not realizing that their camera's on and getting caught in their underwear, like this poor guy on the call. But there's other things that we need to consider, and the reality is that there is not one size that fits all here. Every business is different. They have different requirements, and I think it really needs to be taken as a case by case example. The other thing that we need to make sure that we don't lose sight on. Yeah, sorry, there was a recording that came in there, so I don't know if anyone else heard that. So sorry, one thing that we need to focus on is and not lose sight of is culture. And organizations like Facebook and Google and so on, they focus a lot on culture, as do a lot of other organizations. So yeah, very important. And the only way we can I think that the best way to create culture is through face-to-face activity. So it's fine to talk about all these things, talk about the workplace itself and how, the things that we need to change to make it a safe environment. But I think the sticking point is really public transportation. This is a shot of the New York Metro, and under normal circumstances, this is pretty common. Unfortunately, it's pretty bad. There's some mornings you can't even get onto the train. So I don't know how they're going to solve this. I mean, obviously, that's not what this presentation is all about. It's about the workplace. However, it is something that we really need to factor in, because you can turn around and have all the social distancing and have all these rules and regulations in place in the workplace. But if you're on a packed train like this, a lot of that actually goes out the window. Another thing we need to be mindful of is blurring the lines between work and home. We obviously, when we're working remotely, we're trying to juggle work and the family and pets and everything that's going on in our lives, which is always challenging. At least if you're coming into the office, when you leave the office, typically you can, like myself, I leave my laptop here and I go home, right? I don't touch work. So I am able to switch off and I come back to work the next day and I start again. So, but when we're working from home, it's a different story. So, we need to be mindful of that, of being able to make sure that our well-being is being thought of as well. And this is actually something that I hear a lot of when I talk to people. I'm more productive when I work from home. And I think on a whole, that's true. I find I'm probably more productive when I'm at home. But the thing is, what we can't lose sight of is the fact that our next generation. So how are they going to learn? Like, they're coming through. You have university students, they're coming through. If you think about how we were taught, we typically learned from others. Sure, we studied and educated ourselves, but we typically learned from others teaching us on the job. So if everyone's working remotely, how is that next generation going to learn? How are they going to be taught? How are they going to be mentored? So it's just something that I haven't heard anyone talk about, but I think it's potentially going to be a huge problem moving forward if everyone has that mentality of, I'm just going to work from home, or the organization thinks that it's more beneficial from a bottom line for everyone to work from home. I get it. I totally get all that. But what about the next generation? And if we don't get back into the workplace and educate the kids, the next generation that are coming through, we will lose a whole generation of a skilled workforce. So something to be very mindful about. So I've changed this slide a little bit. So you can see here Robert F. Kennedy, and I've changed it. So ask not what the next generation can do for you, ask what you can do for the next generation. So I want to leave you with that thought. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in the not too distant future.
That concludes our live presentation for today. If you have any questions, kindly await to join the Ask Away session at 9:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. Thank you for joining us. Please complete your session evaluation and have a great show.